Hello everybody and welcome to another video. We're not looking at living story stuff today. Instead we're still going to be looking at lore stuff, but we're going to be looking at lore behind the Fractals of the Mist. A couple of months, I guess, after South Sun came out, back around Christmas, I actually did a part 1 and part 2 of this. Today I'm going to do part 3, a little bit delayed, I guess. I've got part 4 worked out as well, and I envision that to be pretty much the entire series unless I find out there's a lot of extra stuff I want to talk about. But yeah, so today I want to continue on with what we were talking about with the lore behind the Fractals of the Mist. So far I have covered the lore behind the Dolphin Fractal and the Colossus Fractal. A couple of interesting dev comments have come out in the meantime too, which I do want to mention at the start of this because it changes some of the stuff I speculated on before, and actually in some ways makes this a lot more interesting. First of all, the most significant thing is a developer has said on the Guild Wars 2 forums that all these fractals are in the past. I had a big discussion on the first episode about how, yes, this is probably in Tyria because the Fractals of the Mist are the legacy code of Tyria, as Dessa names them. So they're probably all in Tyria, but I said, hey, maybe they could be in the past, in the present, or in the future. A dev has come out and said, no, these are all in the past. These are Tyria's past. This is Tyria's legacy code. Makes sense. It was pretty solid before, but now we know 100% that is true. And another thing, a little bit of a disappointing thing, so I consider that first fact to be quite a good thing, honestly, because it means that ArenaNet have had really solid ideas about what these are all meant to be. But the second thing that's a little bit disappointing, perhaps, is there's also been a lot of people saying, I talked about in the Dolphin Fractal about how there's loads of weird statues with coffins attached to their chests that just looks really weird. It's quite a profound image. And I was speculating whether perhaps they had something to do with the Colossus, which we'd seen in one of the other Fractals too. Actually, I think there has been a statement where one of the devs basically said, oh no, we just wanted something cool to be in this area, so we asked a world designer to just slap something in that looked interesting. Which is kind of, I guess, disheartened a few people. I would say on top of that though, it doesn't necessarily mean there is nothing there, because a lot of the time you'll probably find, yeah, a world designer does just throw a bunch of props into a map, or a world designer that doesn't necessarily know too much about the lore does put something in. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the members of ArenaNet's crew can't go back and look at it and say, hey, this is pretty interesting, can we make a story out of it? And maybe they could have retroactively. It doesn't matter where it starts. We don't have to worry ourselves with how they specifically develop all of this stuff. We just have to worry whether it's all sound once it actually gets out of the door. So that was that's something a few people have brought up to me that I wanted to mention, at least in this video. It doesn't really put me off too much, but it does, I guess, kind of suck when the curtain is pulled back like that. But whatever. Another thing, because it's been a little while, I do want to remind you guys, I went back and watched my own videos just to sort of remind myself. Do remember that Dessa is probably experiencing some kind of time dilation. She's been in the Mistlock Observatory for a while now, and she doesn't actually know what a Sylvari is, if you guys remember. And she also she didn't recognize that people were coming into the Fractals of the Mist from Lion's Arch. She was saying, oh, I'd never do anything to help out those people at that pirate haven. Well, now, loads of people presumably have been into the Fractals of the Mist, and we have more Fractals that are going to be developed, right? Presumably now, Ellen Keel's gone up to Dessa and said, hey, look, I want you to look into the Thormanova reactor. Can you do that for me? So I guess that story of Dessa not knowing what the hell's going on with Lion's Arch will have progressed somewhat at this point, and when we get the new Fractal, we might actually see some further development there, but I wanted to mention that. One last thing as well about the Colossus Fractal that is a very interesting thing that I read in a comment just now, is they mentioned that the Colossus was actually inspired by Prometheus, right? Prometheus, who was chained to a rock by Zeus and was sort of a figurehead of the birth and creation of humanity within that mythos, right? Well, the Colossus in Guild Wars 2 has been inspired by Prometheus. So what if that whole idea of this Colossus we see in that Fractal having something to do with the birth of humanity, what if that translates too? What if what we're seeing with that Colossus has something to do with the origins of humanity in the Guild Wars universe? I think that's a really cool idea as well. I wanted to mention that too. Okay, so with that all aside, we have 9 Fractals. I have mentioned 2 of them. I'm going to mention another 2 this video. One is pretty interesting indeed. The other one's sort of meh. I'm going to start with the really interesting one and end the video on a low note. Hopefully everybody's happy with that. But today we're going to be looking at the Snowblind Fractal, and we're going to be looking at the Volcanic Fractal, starting with Snowblind. Okay, so Snowblind starts off with you in a very cold area. Dessa mentions through her microphone, she says, oh, I'm reading sub-zero temperatures. You look like you're somewhere on the Shiver Peaks, on a very cold mountain. Very dark, very cold mountain, and there happens to be a snowstorm. The start of this fractal involves you walking down this this long, basically a cliff. You're winding your way down a cliff and lighting a bunch of torches, a bunch of beacons on your way. As you light these, they put out heat, which stops you from freezing to death. So you wind your way down this cliffside. That's the way ArenaNet intend people to do it. You can skip and jump down, but you wind your way down the cliffside, lighting the beacons as you go, helping you to presumably not just stay warm, but see in the storm too. And you get to the bottom and you progress on. Now immediately, from the very first moment I played this section of the Fractal, I think this was the first Fractal I ever did, actually. I think that was the first one I ever loaded into. It straight away reminded me of a Guild Wars 1 mission, which I thought was really cool. In Guild Wars 1, there was a mission named Ballis Pass, and during Ballis Pass, you're doing a very similar thing. It's the middle of the night, it's the middle of a big snowstorm, and you are trying to make progress through the Shiver Peaks. You get a torch in that mission, and you have to light every single torch on your way. However, in Guild Wars 1, the mechanics aren't so interesting. There's no, like, frostbite. You're not getting colder and colder and colder. It's just, okay, this gate will not open unless you interact with all of the beacons as you come down. And it's actually kind of annoying. But it's really interesting to see now that we have a very similar thing happening in Guild Wars 2 too. But I don't think that this Fractal has anything necessarily to do with what we saw in Guild Wars 1. This isn't a remake of the Ballis Pass mission in the first game. Because during the Ballis Pass mission, yes, you may be in the same region of the world, but you are fighting your way through a snowstorm to find Prince Rurik, who's gone on ahead, as he always does, and you're lighting your way to try and get to him. It's a part of the mass evacuation of Ascalonian citizens on their way to Crater. That's the story there in Guild Wars 1. And instead, this Fractal is pretty much Norn. It's Sons of Svanir everywhere. It's focusing heavily on the Norn, so yes, we may still be in the Shiver Peaks, but it's likely just from that we're much further north. It seems more likely to me that this similarity in the original mechanics of lighting these torches may have just been ArenaNet having some fun and saying, hey, look at this old concept we had in Guild Wars 1, this is how we handled it in that game, look, we've got a much more robust game engine, we can do a lot more interesting things with Guild Wars 2, how about we look at this old concept and redo it? I think that's probably quite likely, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear a lot of devs end up doing stuff like that, and I think it's really cool as well, especially for those of us who recognise it. It just makes me imagine what the first game could have been like if they'd built it with the second game's engine somehow. Do you know, like a single Fractal that was the entire Prophecy storyline or something, and all those little arbitrary things in the first game that actually in Guild Wars 2 they've made into these really interesting points. Now, what is interesting though is this Guild Wars 1 mission I'm talking about, Ballis Pass. It was in the northern Shiver Peaks, right? And I've just said this Fractal could be even further north of that. But staying with Ballis Pass, actually also in that area, in that general facility, was another place called Beacon's Perch in Guild Wars 1, right? Beacon's Perch. You can go to the ruins of Beacon's Perch in Guild Wars 2. But at Beacon's Perch in Guild Wars 1, you could read a description of a long winding passage through the Shiver Peaks, okay? And this passage mentions a hill giant invasion on the dwarves, okay? And I'm going to come back to this, okay, but essentially it's a stupid little idea, really, but I like the idea that these hill giants, you know, we're now in this Fractal to do with lighting these beacons and these torches. I like the idea that these hill giants that were mentioned in Guild Wars 1, they weren't really hill giants at all, but maybe they were just the Norn, because this is from a dwarven perspective, and dwarves are, like, really, really small, so anything they're looking at that's way too big, they just sort of see it all as a like, for example, and it could have just been a mistake. And I suppose in some small way that checks out, because hill giants aren't actually an enemy you see in Guild Wars 2, they seem to have just disappeared. But in Guild Wars 1, hill giants only ever really lived in Crater, so why would hill giants have come to the Shiver Peaks? But it does make sense that maybe it was the Norn that the dwarves were fighting. Anyway, I'll come back to that later, I'm probably jumping the gun. Okay, so anyway, you light these torches, right, at the start of the Snowblind Fractal, you light all of these torches, progress your way down, and you get attacked by loads of Sons of Svanir. That is all you will find, the Sons of Svanir and their wolves when you get into a forest later. As the Fractal progresses, you light a giant fire to break down a huge ice wall. You travel along and you're confronted by a giant ice elemental, presumably summoned by the Sons of Svanir themselves. The ice elemental is in what looks like a small Norn village of some kind, perhaps a Sons of Svanir outpost, and you are tasked with destroying the ice elemental. I really, as an aside as well, I really liked that they put an ice elemental here, because I still remember just before Guild Wars 2 was coming out, they were talking a lot in all of their demos about how at the end of the human tutorial section you fight the Earth Elemental, if you guys remember. And I remember a lot of devs, when they were doing their run-throughs, were talking about the Elementals. They're these really powerful creatures in Tyria. They're really, really dangerous. And actually, when you get in game, you only ever really saw the Earth Elementals and the Fire Elemental, right? That popped up in a couple of different locations. I still think we've never seen an Air Elemental, and I don't think we'd seen an Ice Elemental. Maybe there was one or two around, but now we've got this big Ice Elemental that we fight. Anyway, against the Sons of Svanir, you manage to destroy the Ice Elemental, and with that, the storm subsides. So finally, you don't need to use these torches to keep yourself alive and warm anymore, which is great, but then you're about to go into a really dark forest that's still filled with Sons of Svanir, and you still want the torch with you so that you can light the way. And that reminds me a lot, again, of another Guild Wars 1 thing, Ravenheart Gloom, and quite a few areas in Guild Wars 2, actually, as well. So you're progressing through this really dark forest. It's actually really cool. I kind of think the Snowblind Fractal, out of all Fractals, is my favourite just in terms of raw mechanics. Now, unfortunately, when you play the Snowblind Fractal enough, especially when you get to that forest section, it's easy to just skip all of the mobs and you know exactly where you're going. But the first time you do play it, if you're in a full team full of newbies, you will genuinely get lost and you'll be like, oh, well, which way do we go? And you're sort of fumbling through the darkness and fighting these enemies as you go, which is a really fantastic experience. But you travel through this dark forest and eventually come to a boss at the end of the Fractal, okay? Now, this boss is another Son of Svanir. He looks corrupted by Jormag, like an Ice Brood, right? But he is a Son of Svanir named Lornarr, okay? Legendary Shaman Lornarr Dragonseeker. Very impressive name. He keeps spamming "your weakness makes me laugh," which has become a bit of a joke, to be honest. But he also spams "dragon will devour all." He just keeps saying this over and over. Dragon will devour all. Dragon will devour all. So clearly he's a straight up Son of Svanir. He wants Jormag's power, right? You kill him and that's the end of the Fractal. So, when was this? That's going to be the question now from a lot of these Fractals. We know for sure it's a part of Tyria's past. When did this take place? And to a lesser extent, where did this take place? What's really interesting about the Fractal is that last enemy. He's a Norn, but he's called Lornarr. Okay, now Lornarr is something that appeared in Guild Wars 1 lore. Lornarr was the name of a legendary dwarf hero. Okay, so why are we now fighting a Norn named Lornarr? How has that come about? Lornarr, the dwarf hero, actually had an entire region of the world, a really long pass, north to south, through the Shiver Peaks, named after him. This was a really significant hero. And you can still see that in Guild Wars 2. Lornarr's Pass, that's one of the maps in Guild Wars 2, one of the longest maps. That was also the name of an explorable area in Guild Wars 1 too, Lornarr's Pass. This is named after this dwarf hero. And what did he do to have such a great honour? He defended Beacon's Perch from an invasion of hill giants. So my stupid little idea, we've suddenly come back to the hill giants thing. Also, can I note, this area is called Beacon's Perch. Okay, what were we doing at the start of the Fractal? We were lighting beacons, weren't we? So maybe what I originally said, how this reminds me of Borlis Pass in Guild Wars 1 and this whole thing to do with Prince Rurik, maybe it wasn't that at all. Maybe we've just been at Beacon's Perch. That's where the Snowblind Fractal could be set, Beacon's Perch. In Guild Wars 1, this outpost you can go to it, you can see there are loads of these torches. This could be Beacon's Perch, just at a different period of time. Now, am I suggesting that this Fractal is showing us the hill giant invasion, or the supposed hill giant that was actually Norn? No, I'm not, because these are Sons of Svanir, right? Sons of Svanir are relatively new. They are a newer thing than when this invasion previously happened. And for that matter, if this was the hill giant invasion, where are the dwarves? We're not playing as dwarves. We aren't Lornarr. It wasn't like Lornarr killed a Norn and then took his name. So why have we got these terms suddenly being thrown about? Well, okay, here's my vague theory, and again, it is just a theory. Again, I don't know everything. Please don't take it as gospel, guys. I think that a long time ago, over 1,000 years ago, about 500 years after the Exodus of the Gods, as is named specifically in the timeline in Guild Wars 1, a faction of Norn came from their homelands in the far Shiver Peaks, and they came down to the south, right? They came in the name of conquest, or maybe they were fleeing something, but some Norn came down to the south. And they were met by the dwarves. And then for whatever reason, these Norn and the dwarves fell into conflict. Maybe the Norn thought that the dwarves, these puny little things, weren't worth their time. Maybe the dwarves were particularly xenophobic at the time. Maybe it was just the stone summit that the Norn had come across. We don't know. But for whatever reason, these Norn came into conflict with the dwarves. And probably even the Norn did do pretty well fighting against them. However, eventually, a dwarf commander or fighter or whatever, a dwarven hero named Lornarr, finally defeated them. Where did he defeat them? He defeated them at Lornarr's Pass, this area of the world we see in Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2 that is now named after him. This entire strip of the Shiver Peaks. Perhaps he didn't defeat them right at Lornarr's Pass, but maybe Lornarr's Pass was named as such because it represents sort of the Norn descent through the mountains. It's this very long north to south passageway. Maybe Lornarr's Pass is where the Norn had come through, and where Lornarr's Pass ends, that is where they were finally stopped, getting closer and closer to the Dwarven capital. Anyway, Lornarr defeated the Norn. He had this great honour bestowed upon him, but for whatever reason, these Norn went down as hill giants in the histories. Maybe the dwarves didn't want to remember the Norn. Maybe the Norn disappeared for so long that the dwarves couldn't quite remember what the enemies were, and eventually it became hill giants because they were still in that general area of the world. Or maybe it literally is the dwarves are these tiny little guys, not particularly intelligent when compared to other short race like the Asura, and maybe they literally couldn't tell the difference, all these massive things towering over them. Norn may as well have been a hill giant to them. Anyway, that happens. Lornarr's Pass is established. The events of Guild Wars 1 occur, Dwarven civilization falls, then the 250 years passes, the Norn move south again. Now the Dwarven lands are empty, the Norn are completely unresisted. The Sons of Svanir are formed in this time and begin to worship Jormag. Now, still before Guild Wars 2, the Sons of Svanir learn about this old Norn and Dwarven fight. And maybe they learn that Lornarr only beat the Norn because of some powerful artifact of some kind. Or perhaps they just want to go there to piss on the graves of the dwarves. Who knows, right? But the Sons of Svanir become invested in this tale. And they return to that area. And that's what we're seeing in the Snowblind Fractal. It's the Sons of Svanir returning to this area where Lornarr was defeated. Or maybe even where the old Norn were defeated. And maybe they're trying to claim some weapon or magic. And eventually we find their leader. And he has named himself Lornarr. Now, Lornarr was once this great dwarf hero. Well, he takes Lornarr's name. Maybe it's got some magical implication there. Maybe because he siphoned Lornarr's power or something, he's now known as Lornarr. Or maybe it's just much more simple. I've taken your name in mockery. I don't want people to remember this dwarf hero. Lornarr will now be known as a great Norn hero. And that's sort of where the tale ends. Did Lornarr eventually get away? I guess we don't know, because we're only seeing this in the Fractals of the Mists. In the Fractals of the Mists, which is just the Mists replicating history, we, the players, then defeat Lornarr. But Lornarr, the real Lornarr, could still be out there. The Norn do live for a very long time ago. This doesn't have to have been too long in the past for this to have happened. And maybe Lornarr, this Norn, will pop up in the story again at some point. But that's kind of my theory about it. You could go a bit more conservative with it and say, no, this whole hill giant idea, it was hill giants, and maybe just the Sons of Svanir knew about the hill giants dying and they were invested anyway, right? It doesn't have to have been the Norn for this to make sense. Perhaps there was some Norn involvement somewhere, because otherwise how else do the Sons of Svanir know to return to this site? But that's not too unlikely either. I mean, the thing is, we don't know very much about the Norn's relationship with the other gigantic races. The Jotun are the only giant race really that we've got any measure of lore about in terms of their relationship with the Norn. There have been loads of giant races, but we just sort of never heard how the Norn interacted with them. And worse, like these hill giants I'm talking about, hill giants don't really exist in Guild Wars 2. Giants in Guild Wars 2 are completely different creatures, much bigger, and they're cyclopses, right? And there's very few of them, and there's a very difficult title to kill all of them. So until we get more information like that, you can't say either way, but that's my general theory on the Snowblind Fractal. That is why we see a Norn son of Svanir named after a great dwarven hero, and it makes sense to me because in the Fractal we are doing stuff with beacons, and in Guild Wars 1 at Beacon's Perch we learn about the hill giant invasion against the dwarves that Lornarr saved. You know, there are three pieces that are quite tightly interwoven here. So that's my idea with the Snowblind Fractal. If you don't buy it, then it remains a big mystery. I'd love to hear what your guys' theories are. But before this video gets too long, I want to quickly go over the Volcanic Fractal 2. The Volcanic Fractal is a lot more simple. I only have a little bit of speculation on this one. The setting here is that we're in a lava-filled area that is teeming with Growl, okay? And one particular very dangerous Growl Shaman, alright? You progress through the Volcanic Fractal, dodging flaming boulders and killing Growl as you go, and namely you are trying to save a group of human villagers, okay? So presumably there's a human village nearby, right? And if you can save a lot of the villagers, you get a nice little bonus chest, but you're going to fight the big bad boss, the Growl Shaman, twice. The first time you fight him, he like suicides and jumps in the lava, and you think, oh, that's it, he's defeated. But actually he returns as a giant, like, imp transformation dangerous creature that can be very difficult for some parties to defeat. But he comes back as this really dangerous boss. You fight him again. He's still trying to kill humans. He's trying to feed on them to heal himself up. You defeat him again, and that is the end of the Fractal. This is one of those much more bare bones Fractals, okay? One thing that really hasn't got much to do with the lore, but should be mentioned, is the whole thing is pretty much a big Indiana Jones reference. Like, it's got loads of Indiana Jones references in it. In particular, eventually you'll find a skeleton wearing a fedora. So it's like, yeah, okay, Indiana Jones. But what is there for real lore? To me, really the most interesting thing about this is it's not the Growl. The Growl are talking about how they need all these sacrifices for a god of theirs, okay? We can't actually, you can't be like, oh, okay, what is their god? Is this really significant? Because the Growl don't have one god, right? A lot of Growl will just sort of band up. They're very primitive creatures, and they'll just band together in their own little tribes, and every tribe has got its own god. And, like, tribes will continuously fight one another over which god is the real god kind of thing. Like, the Growl are not one unified force that are all allied with one another under one god. They're all over the place. So, yes, we've got a tribe of Growl here that are worshipping a god, but is that significant? Probably not. I mean, in game we see tribes of Growl worshipping a freaking giant face in a rock side, right? There isn't necessarily too much there. But what is interesting to me is this is called the Volcanic Fractal, and there's loads of lava all over the place. We are quite clearly in a volcano. Well, how many volcanoes are there in the Guild Wars universe? You can actually kind of point at them. You know, there's a large active chain of volcanoes named the Fire Island Chain that you could go to in the first game, but not the second game. But this really doesn't look like the Fire Island Chain to me. It could be, but why would a bunch of Growl be there? And namely, why would there be humans there? Human villagers that seem to have just been kidnapped from nearby. Why would they be at this volcano on the Fire Island Chain? I think that's incredibly unlikely. Well, what else have we got? There's another Fire Island Chain way off to the north that we've never seen or never heard of and have no idea what's going on there. It could have something to do with that, I suppose. Maybe there are villagers living up there. It doesn't look particularly lush or green as if humans would be able to survive there, but there is a place up there. Where else could there be? There's not really much in the way of volcanoes. There's like stuff you can see on the map and be like, oh, that could be a volcano. And there are areas filled with lava. I mean, you could look at the Flame Legion area in Guild Wars 2, like Fireheart Rise. That place is full of lava. There's lava all over the place. But is that really volcanic activity, or is that just a byproduct of the Flame Legion's activities? I would go with the latter there. And certainly, I mean, in this current period of time, you probably wouldn't see any human villagers there just absent-mindedly getting kidnapped. But maybe at some point in the past you would. I mean, and we can't even say this is in the future and the lava's just left over. So where is this taking place? Is this an area of the world that we've never seen at all? Or maybe it's a historic volcano. What if we go really far back in time to when there were different volcanoes and the geography was completely different? I mean, the geography changed quite a lot from Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2. Who's to say it couldn't have changed a lot, you know, from 1,000 years ago? I still don't really believe that. That could be the case. This could be the Fire Island Chain a long time ago before the Massart ever went there, kind of thing, maybe. But I don't know. I don't believe that. You are in a limited time frame anyway, because the humans have only been on Tyria for a certain period of time. So I'm going to go with the idea that maybe these are just humans from a totally different area of Tyria we've not seen before. Mainly because that allows arenas to have a bit more creative freedom, and also it's a little bit exciting to think that maybe they put a fractal in to do with one of these very remote areas we've not seen. That's really all I can say about that one. There may be some extra speculation or something you guys can fill in, and I'll talk about on the next part. But yeah, those are the next two Fractals. Hope you guys found something vaguely interesting out of this. Maybe next time you're playing through the Fractals of the Mist and you do get to Snowblind and you see Lornarr, you'll maybe have a little bit more insight into what ArenaNet might possibly be doing. And the same with the Growl one too. But there are some more duddy Fractals. There's just some small stuff I can mention. Anyway, video's been long enough. Thanks very much, guys, for watching. Hope you're having a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. Next chapter of the Living Stories coming out. See you next time.